In this particular video, I'm going to talk about trigonometry graphs. So this is actually chapter 3 of EG2. The video will be split into 3 portions. The very first portion, I'm going to explain to you what is a trigo graph, what are the meanings of amplitude, period, and so on. In video number 2, we're actually going to do some examples, and then in video number 3, further examples. Yeah? So let's start from the very beginning. This is video 1. What in the world is trigonometric graphs? The equation for trigo graphs usually looks something like this. There's an A, there is a B, or sometimes there's a C, sometimes there's a K, but not always. And then the thing that always appears is you would either have a sine or a cosine. Well, first of all, you need to recognize what the sine graph or the cosine graph looks like. I mean, if you have no idea what the graph looks like, you're in massive trouble, okay? So just a very quick run through. What does sine graph look like? It looks like an S. Okay, starts from the bottom, it goes up, goes to the very top, comes down again, and then eventually it will finish at 0. Okay, finish here. This is sine graph. What does the cosine graph look like? Let me erase away the sine graph. The cosine graph would look something like this. I'm going to use red, okay? The cosine graph starts from the top, goes down to the very bottom, comes back up, and back to the very top again. Okay? So it starts from the highest point and then it comes down. Yeah? It crosses this point here, 0, comes with the very lowest point, goes up, crosses 0 again, and then ends at the very top. This is cosine x. You have to recognize the shape of these two graphs. If not, you are in big trouble. You don't even know how to start. Okay? I'm going to go on and assume that you know what the two graphs look like already, and I'm going to start talking about some important things you need to know in this chapter. First, what is the meaning of amplitude? Okay, amplitude. Amplitude is how large the graph goes vertically. For example, this particular graph here is the graph of sine x. Sine x, okay? And you can see that it always revolves around a certain center line. This is like the center line. You can see it goes up and down and up and down, and it always goes about this center line. The amplitude is the largest difference from the center line to the highest point, or to the lowest point. Okay, or to the lowest point. This is amplitude. Yeah. So it's always to take the highest point to the center line, or take the lowest point to the center line. This is amplitude. In mathematical terms, amplitude is just simply this value, A. Okay, A. But sometimes the value of A can be negative. For example, let's say the question gives you something like this: y equals to minus 2 sine x. And then I say, what's amplitude? Well, amplitude is just simply A. So is amplitude equals to minus 2? No, amplitude is not equals to minus 2. Okay? Because amplitude must always be a positive number. So it's more accurate to say that amplitude must be the modulus of A. So the answer to this is not minus 2. The answer to this is 2. Okay? The amplitude is 2. So once again, just take the number that's used in A here, turn it into a positive number. If it's already positive, just use that number. If it's a negative number, turn it into a positive number, that's amplitude. Okay? Largest distance from the top to the center line, or from the bottom to the center line. Moving on, I'm going to go to the period. So what is a period? Let's just keep it very simple. See the highest point here? The next highest point? This distance is known as the period. Okay? If you want to find a period visually on the graph, this is how you do it. You can also take the lowest point to the lowest point. It's also okay. You'll see that the distance is the same. It's also the period. Okay? There is another way, a slightly more complex way, but it's also correct. And some lecturers like to use that. The other way is the starting point to the next starting point. You see, this starting point goes up, right? Comes back down. Now notice that the period is not up to here, because here it's going down, so we don't count it. Come back to here, it's going up as well. So you see, going up. This distance is also the period. Essentially, the period is the length where the graph would recycle itself. See, if you look at it here and you look at it here, it looks like it's the same thing. It's the same graph. Okay, it's the same graph. So that's what the period is. Yeah. How do we calculate the period from the equation that's given to us? To find the period, we need to use this value of b. There is a certain formula, okay? It's just 2 pi over b. How do you get that? You don't have to know. Don't bother. Period is just 2 pi over b. That's all you need to know. So if the question asks you, find the period, okay? Find the period of this particular graph. 2 sine 3x, for example. So what's the period? the period would be 2 pi over b. What's b? b is 3, so 2 pi over 3. So the answer is, well, 2 pi over 3. That's your answer. Okay, the period is just simply 2 pi over 3. That's the period. Done. Okay, so we've covered amplitude, we've covered period. Y equals to sine x, which is what's here. Okay, this is y equals to sine x. Yeah. What's the period of this graph? Period is 2 pi over b. What's the value of b? Well, b is 1. See, there's no number here. B is 1. So the period is just simply equals to 2 pi. Now, what I want to tell you is there's something known as the interval. Okay? And the interval is the period divided by 4. Okay? Which is 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2. Now, what is an interval? What is this? I'm going to describe it visually, okay? If the period is from the highest point to the highest point, if this is a period, notice that if I take this graph and I split it into 4 equal portions, what do I get? This is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. And you notice that the interval always goes from highest point to 0, for example, or 0 to lowest, or lowest to 0, or 0 to highest. The interval is a very convenient way of telling you where the important points are. It's either the highest point, or 0, or lowest point. So the interval is useful. So I recommend that you just find the interval anyway. If you want to plot the graph later, you will see that this is incredibly useful. Okay, so that's interval. Just take the period, divide by 4. Let's move on. What is a phase shift? Okay, what's a phase shift? Phase shift. Okay, the phase shift is defined as minus c over b. So this is your c and this is your b. That's the mathematical term. Okay, we're just going to find minus c over b. Now, there are two ways of looking at this. If you would like to understand what phase shift is, it can be quite complex, because phase shift means I take this particular graph here, I can shift it a certain distance, and the graph will look something like that. Okay, it will be shifted. Well, that's complex. Sometimes students don't understand that. So, in all honesty, you really don't have to understand how phase shift comes about. You don't really have to understand what phase shift looks like after you shift a particular graph. Okay, if you don't understand it, it's fine. What you do need to know is, how does my graph look like after I phase shift? And because that's what I want to do, I want to draw the graph. Okay, so for now, let's just keep it as this, minus c over b. So if your graph is 2 sine 3x minus 4, for example, what is minus c over b? This is your c, this is your b, so this is equals to minus 4 over 3. Oops, that's not correct, because c is minus 4. Okay, so this one here, you got to take the minus 4 here as well. They cancel out, and the answer is 4 over 3. Okay, that's phase shift. To find out more about phase shift, look up in the second video. We will talk a bit more about the example, and you can see phase shift in action. Yeah. Last one. Do you remember what the last thing is? The last one you got to learn here is something known as the vertical shift. Okay, vertical shift, which in this particular case is K. What's a vertical shift? Take this entire graph, shift up or shift down. Okay, so let's say, for example, y equals to sine x plus 3. This is my value of k. Now notice that it's not in brackets. There are no brackets about the x and plus 3. If there were brackets, then it would be c. Okay, but there are no brackets. See, there are no brackets. This plus 3 is outside, so it's k. What does that mean? I'm going to take every single point here and add plus 3. Okay, let's not use plus 3. I'm going to use plus 1. Okay, I'm going to use plus 1. Sine x plus 1. So every single point here, plus 1. This is plus 1, this is plus 1, this is plus 1, this is plus 1, this is plus 1. Can you see how the graph is going to look? It's plus 1, this is plus 1. So your graph will look something like this. Okay, it's basically your original graph, everything shifted up by 1, plus 1. So what's vertical shift? K. That's it. What if it was a negative number? Then you would shift down, for example. So that's not too difficult. Yeah. So these are the basic things that you need to know for chapter 3 that would help you along. Okay.